Alexander Clark never expected that driving a taxi at 2 a.m. would lead to the most important conversation of his life. The billionaire CEO had been living a double life for months, escaping his corporate prison by night. When a 5-year-old girl with pigtails climbed into his back seat and asked the question that would shatter everything he thought he knew about family, love, and what it meant to be a father. As her mother Grace scrambled to apologize, Alexander found himself frozen, staring into eyes that looked exactly like his own, realizing that some secrets have a way of finding their way home, even when you're hiding behind a fake mustache and a baseball cap. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The city never slept, and neither did Alexander Clark's restless soul. At 35, he commanded a business empire worth billions, yet here he was at midnight, adjusting a fake mustache in the rearview mirror of a beat-up yellow taxi. The fluorescent lights of downtown Chicago cast harsh shadows across his weathered face as he pulled the baseball cap lower over his distinctive green eyes. This was his escape, his sanctuary from the suffocating world of board meetings, hostile takeovers, and the constant pressure of being Alexander Clark, the youngest CEO to ever helm Clark Industries. For 6 months now, he had been living this double life. By day, he wore $1,000 suits and made decisions that affected thousands of employees. By night, he became Alex the taxi driver, complete with a Chicago accent he had perfected, and a backstory about being a community college dropout trying to make ends meet. The irony wasn't lost on him that he found more genuine human connection in the backseat conversations with strangers than in all his corporate dealings combined. The radio crackled to life. Car 47, pickup at Mercy General Hospital, emergency room entrance. Alexander grabbed the radio, his manicured hands now calloused from months of gripping the steering wheel. Car 47, en route, he responded, his voice carrying none of the authority that commanded corporate America. Mercy General stood like a beacon in the darkness, its windows glowing against the November sky. Alexander had donated millions to this hospital through his foundation, yet he had never actually set foot inside until tonight. He pulled up to the emergency entrance where a young woman stood clutching a small girl to her chest. Even in the dim light, he could see the exhaustion etched into her features, the way her shoulders sagged with invisible weight. Grace Johnson looked nothing like the polished executives Alexander was accustomed to seeing. Her nurse scrubs were wrinkled, her auburn hair escaping from a ponytail that had seen better hours. Dark circles shadowed her brown eyes, but there was something fierce and determined in her posture as she held her daughter protectively. This was a woman who had been fighting battles long before tonight. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Grace said, as she slid into the back seat with her daughter. Her voice carried a slight tremor that spoke of barely contained emotions. "We need to go to 1847 Maple Street, please. And I'm sorry, but I need to ask you to drive carefully. Mia just had some tests done, and she's been through enough tonight." Alexander glanced in the rearview mirror at the little girl nestled against her mother's side. Mia appeared to be about 5 years old, with the kind of wild curls that refused to be tamed, and eyes that seemed far too wise for her age. She wore a hospital bracelet around her tiny wrist, and there was something about her pale complexion that made Alexander's chest tighten with concern. "Of course," he said, his carefully practiced accent slipping slightly. "Everything's going to be all right." It was a promise he had no business making, but something about this fragile family unit made him want to shield them from whatever storm they were weathering. As he pulled away from the hospital, Alexander found himself driving more slowly than usual, taking corners with extra care. In his corporate world, everything moved at breakneck speed. Decisions were made in milliseconds, fortunes won and lost in the time it took to send an email. But tonight, time felt precious in a different way, measured not in profits, but in the steady breathing of a child who needed gentleness. "Mommy, why did the doctor need to take so much blood?" Mia's voice was small but curious. Alexander watched in the mirror as Grace smoothed her daughter's hair with infinite tenderness. "Sometimes doctors need to check things to make sure we're healthy, sweetheart. Like when we check to make sure all our toys are put away properly." Grace's voice carried the kind of practiced patience that came from explaining difficult things to a child who had already heard too many difficult explanations. But I don't like needles, Mia continued, her lower lip jutting out in a pout that somehow managed to be both heartbreaking and adorable. They're scary. Alexander found himself speaking before he could think better of it. You know what I do when I'm scared of something? He caught Mia's attention in the rearview mirror. I think about superheroes. I bet you're braver than you think you are. Mia's eyes lit up with interest. What kind of superheroes? Well, Alexander said, warming to the subject. There's this superhero called Braveheart who gets stronger every time she faces something scary. The more scared she is, the more powerful she becomes. I bet you've got some brave heart in you. Grace looked surprised by the taxi driver's gentle interaction with her daughter. Most drivers barely acknowledge passengers, let alone engaged with children. There was something different about this one. Something in his voice that suggested education and experience beyond what his appearance indicated. I like that, Mia said, settling back against her mother's side. Mommy, am I like Braveheart? You're the bravest person I know, Grace replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her daughter's head. Braver than any superhero. As they drove through the quieter residential streets, Alexander found himself stealing glances at this small family in his back seat. There was something about them that stirred memories he had buried long ago. Growing up, he had been raised by nannies and tutors, while his parents built their business empire. Love had been expressed through trust funds and prestigious schools, rather than bedtime stories and gentle reassurances. Mr. Taxi Driver, Mia said suddenly, her voice cutting through Alexander's reverie. Do you have kids? The question hit Alexander like a physical blow. In all his months of driving, no one had ever asked him something so personal. His carefully constructed backstory hadn't included details about family, mainly because the subject was too painful to fabricate. No, sweetheart, I don't, he answered honestly, his voice softer than he intended. That's okay, Mia said, with the matter-of-fact acceptance that only children possessed. Not everybody gets to be a daddy, but I think you'd be a good one. Grace shifted uncomfortably. Mia, honey, maybe we shouldn't ask so many personal questions. It's all right, Alexander said, though his hands had tightened on the steering wheel. She's just curious. That's a good thing. The truth was, Alexander had never allowed himself to seriously consider fatherhood. His world was too demanding, too consuming. He had seen what the pressure of running Clark Industries had done to his own father, how it had turned a once warm man into someone who measured love in quarterly profits. Alexander had sworn he would never put a child through that kind of emotional abandonment, even if it meant accepting a life of professional success and personal isolation. They were nearly at Maple Street when Mia spoke again, her voice drowsy from the late hour and medical stress. Mommy, remember when you said that sometimes daddies come when you need them most? Alexander felt his breath catch. In the mirror, he could see Grace's face had gone pale. Mia, sweetie, we've talked about this, Grace said gently, but there was a note of desperation in her voice. Some families are just mommies and little girls, and that's perfectly wonderful. But Mia had turned her attention back to Alexander, studying his reflection in the rearview mirror with the intense focus that only children could muster. You have nice eyes, she said thoughtfully. They're green like mine. Alexander's hands began to tremble slightly on the steering wheel. It was true, they did share the same unusual shade of green eyes, but that was surely just coincidence. Lots of people had green eyes. Yet something about the way Mia was looking at him, something about the tilt of her head and the stubborn set of her jaw, seemed hauntingly familiar. Mia, please don't bother the nice man, Grace said, her voice strained. He's just trying to do his job. I'm not bothering him, Mia protested. I'm just talking. Right, Mr. Taxi Driver? You don't mind talking to me, do you? Not at all, Alexander said, though his voice sounded strange even to his own ears. I like talking to you. Grace was watching him carefully now, as if sensing something beneath the surface of his ordinary taxi driver facade. There was intelligence in her brown eyes, the kind that came from years of reading people and situations with the precision necessary for survival. They pulled onto Maple Street, a quiet residential area lined with modest homes and mature trees. Alexander had grown up in a mansion on the other side of the city, but there was something appealing about this neighborhood's sense of community and authenticity. Children's bicycles sat on front lawns, jack-o'-lanterns still decorated porches from Halloween, and lights glowed warmly in kitchen windows. "It's the blue house with the white fence," Grace directed. "The one with the little garden in front." As Alexander pulled up to the curb, he could see that despite its modest size, the house was well-maintained and welcoming. There were flowers in window boxes, even in November, and a small wooden sign by the door that read, "Home is where love lives." It was the kind of place Alexander had always imagined real families lived, the kind of home that existed in commercials and movies, but had never been part of his own experience. "How much do I owe you?" Grace asked, reaching for her purse with the efficient movements of someone accustomed to handling finances carefully. "$18.50, Alexander said, though his mind was still reeling from the conversation with Mia. There was something about this child that had gotten under his skin in a way he couldn't explain. Grace handed him a 20. "Keep the change. And thank you for being so patient with Mia. She's had a difficult few months, and kindness from strangers means more than you know." As Grace opened the car door, Mia suddenly leaned forward, her small hand reaching toward the front seat. "Mr. Taxi Driver, what's your name?" Alexander hesitated. He had been using the name Alex for months, but something about this moment felt too important for lies. "Alexander," he said quietly. Mia's face lit up with a smile that transformed her entire expression. "That's a strong name, like a king or a prince." She paused, studying his face in the mirror once more. "Alexander, are you my new daddy?" The world seemed to stop spinning. Alexander felt his heart cease beating, felt the air leave his lungs in a rush that left him dizzy. Grace had gone completely still, her face drained of all color. "Mia, sweetheart, we need to go inside," Grace said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Right now." But Mia wasn't finished. "Mommy always said that when the right daddy came along, I would just know. And I know. I can feel it right here." She pressed her small hand to her chest, right over her heart. Alexander turned around in his seat, no longer able to pretend this was just another fare. Looking directly at Mia, he saw his own eyes reflected back at him, but more than that, he saw something indefinable, yet unmistakable. A recognition that went beyond physical resemblance. "Mia," Grace said urgently, "we need to go. Now." "Why won't you answer me?" Mia asked Alexander, her voice taking on the plaintive note that children used when they sensed adults were keeping secrets. "Don't you want to be my daddy?" Alexander found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "It's not about wanting, sweetheart. Sometimes things are more complicated than that." Grace was fumbling with the car door handle, clearly desperate to escape this conversation. "I'm so sorry," she said to Alexander. She's been asking about her father more lately, and she's tired, and she doesn't understand. "Grace." Alexander's voice stopped her cold. The way he said her name, with recognition and something deeper, made her freeze. "Grace Johnson." She turned to look at him directly for the first time, really look at him. Alexander reached up and removed his baseball cap, then peeled away the fake mustache that had been part of his disguise. Under the streetlight, his face was revealed clearly for the first time. Grace's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and something that looked like fear. "Oh my God, it's you! It's really you!" Mia looked back and forth between the adults, sensing the sudden tension but not understanding it. "Mommy, what's wrong? Why do you look scared?" Alexander stepped out of the taxi, his tall frame unfolding in the quiet street. Without the disguise, he looked exactly like what he was, a powerful man accustomed to command, but his hands were shaking as he faced Grace across the roof of the car. "We need to talk," he said simply. Grace shook her head vehemently. No, we don't. Come on, Mia, we're going inside right now." "But Mommy," Mia protested, "I want to talk to Alexander some more. He's nice, and he tells good stories about superheroes." "Mia, please. Please," Grace said, her voice breaking. "Just this once. Please don't argue with me." Alexander walked around the car slowly, his movements careful and non-threatening. Grace, please, 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking for. 5 minutes. Grace laughed bitterly. You think 5 minutes is going to fix 6 years of silence? 6 years of not knowing, not caring, not even checking to see if she existed? The pieces were falling into place now, and Alexander felt the weight of understanding crush down on him. 6 years ago. A brief relationship that had ended badly when business pressures overwhelmed everything else in his life. A woman who had tried to tell him something important, but he had been too consumed with a merger to listen properly. You tried to tell me, he said quietly. 6 years ago, you called, and you hung up on me, Grace finished. You told your assistant to handle your personal complications and to make sure I understood that you weren't interested in gold diggers trying to trap you with pregnancy claims. Alexander closed his eyes, the memory hitting him like a physical blow. He remembered that time period as the most stressful of his career. His father had been pressuring him to prove himself worthy of inheriting the company. Every phone call had seemed like a potential threat to his focus. He had been 29 years old and utterly ruthless in protecting what he saw as his destiny. I didn't know, he said, his voice barely audible. Grace, I swear to you, I didn't know she existed. Because you didn't want to know, Grace replied, but some of the anger had got out of her voice, replaced by exhaustion. Because you made it clear that anything personal was a distraction you couldn't afford. Mia had been watching this exchange with growing confusion and concern. Mommy, why are you crying? Did I do something wrong? Grace knelt down to her daughter's level, wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. No, baby, you didn't do anything wrong. You never do anything wrong. Then why is everyone sad? Mia asked. I thought we were happy because Alexander is here. Alexander felt his heart break completely at the innocence in her voice. This child, his child, had been living with questions about her father for years, and he had been driving around in a taxi feeling sorry for himself because his life lacked meaning. Mia, he said carefully, kneeling down so he was at her eye level. Can I ask you something? She nodded eagerly. Yes. Do you know what it means when someone makes a really big mistake, but they want to fix it even though it might be too late? Mia considered this with the seriousness of a philosopher. Like when I broke Mommy's favorite cup but I wanted to glue it back together? Exactly like that, Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. Sometimes grown-ups break things that are much more important than cups, and sometimes they don't even realize what they've broken until much later. Grace was watching this interaction with a mixture of heartbreak and amazement. Despite everything, despite the years of absence and silence, there was something undeniably right about seeing Alexander connect with Mia. The resemblance was striking now that she was looking for it, not just in their eyes, but in their expressions, the way they both tilted their heads when they were thinking. Alexander, Grace said quietly, we can't do this. Not here, not like this. She's 5 years old. She doesn't understand complicated adult situations. But I do understand some things, Mia said, looking between them with the stubborn expression that Grace recognized as her own. I understand that Alexander makes me feel safe, like when Mommy reads me stories. And I understand that you're both acting weird, but I still think he should come have hot chocolate with us. Alexander looked at Grace pleadingly. Please. I know I have no right to ask for anything, but please. Let me try to explain. Let me try to understand where I've missed. Grace closed her eyes, and Alexander could see her internal struggle playing out across her features. Finally, she opened them and looked directly at him. 1 hour. That's all. And if you upset her, if you make promises you can't keep, if you do anything to hurt her, I will make sure you never see her again. Do you understand me? I understand, Alexander said. And Grace? I know you have no reason to trust me, but I swear to you, the last thing I want to do is hurt her. The walk to the front door felt like the longest journey of Alexander's life. Here was a home, a real home. Not the cold mansion where he had grown up, or the sterile penthouse where he currently lived. This was a place where love lived, just as the sign by the door proclaimed. Inside, the house was warm and inviting. Photographs covered the refrigerator and lined the mantelpiece, chronicling Mia's growth from a tiny baby to the spirited child she was now. Alexander found himself drawn to these Images? Seeing his own features reflected in her face at different ages. How had he missed this? How had he been so blind to something so important? "I'll make hot chocolate," Grace said, her voice carefully neutral. "Mia, go wash your hands and change out of those hospital clothes." As Mia scampered off to follow her mother's instructions, Alexander found himself alone with Grace for the first time in 6 years. She moved around the kitchen with efficient familiarity, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided looking directly at him. "She's beautiful," he said quietly. "She's incredible." Grace's hands stilled on the hot chocolate mix. "She is. She's the best thing that ever happened to me." "Tell me about her," Alexander said. "Tell me everything. I know I don't deserve to know, but please." Grace was quiet for so long that Alexander thought she might refuse. Finally, she began to speak, her voice soft but steady. She was born on March 15th. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. She came 2 weeks early, and she's been impatient about everything ever since. She loves books and dinosaurs and anything purple. She's scary smart, Alexander. Sometimes I catch her working out problems that kids her age shouldn't even understand. Alexander listened, memorizing every detail. Is she healthy?" "The hospital tonight." Grace's face clouded. "She's been having some dizzy spells lately. Fatigue. The doctors are running tests to rule out." She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "To rule out what?" Alexander pressed gently. "Leukemia runs in families," Grace said quietly. "My grandmother had it. They're just being cautious, but the waiting is terrifying." Alexander felt cold dread wash over him. "When will you know?" "Next week. Maybe sooner." Grace turned to face him fully. "That's why tonight was so hard. She's been asking about her father more and more lately, and I keep wondering if it's because some part of her knows she might be really sick. Kids sense things sometimes." The weight of this revelation hit Alexander like a sledgehammer. Not only did he have a daughter he had never known about, but she might be seriously ill. The timing of their meeting suddenly felt less like coincidence and more like fate. "Grace, if she needs anything at all, medical care, specialists, whatever it costs." "Stop," Grace said sharply. "Just stop. You don't get to ride in here like some white knight and throw money at the problem. We've been fine without you for 6 years. We'll be fine regardless of what the tests show." "But you don't have to be fine without me," Alexander said desperately. "Not anymore. I know I messed up. I know I failed both of you in the worst possible way. But I'm here now. I want to help. I want to be part of her life." "For how long?" Grace challenged. "Until the novelty wears off? Until your business demands all your attention again? Until you decide that fatherhood is too complicated for your lifestyle?" Alexander opened his mouth to protest, but Grace continued. "Do you know what it was like, Alexander? Being 24 years old and pregnant and alone? Do you know what it was like trying to finish nursing school while taking care of a baby because I couldn't afford childcare? Do you know how many nights I cried myself to sleep wondering if I was enough for her?" "Grace, I'm not finished," Grace said, her voice rising. "Do you know what it's like when your 5-year-old daughter asks why she doesn't have a daddy like other kids? Do you know how hard it is to explain that sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt the people they're supposed to love most?" Alexander felt each word like a knife to his chest. "I never meant for any of this to happen. If I had known." "But you didn't want to know," Grace repeated. "That's the point. You made it clear that I was disposable, that whatever we had meant nothing compared to your precious business empire." Mia's voice interrupted their heated conversation. "Why are you arguing? I thought we were going to have hot chocolate and tell stories." Grace immediately shifted gears, her tone becoming gentle and warm. "We're not arguing, sweetheart. We're just talking about grown-up things. Come here and help me with the marshmallows." As Mia climbed onto a stool to reach the marshmallows, Alexander watched the easy interaction between mother and daughter. There was such natural affection there, such genuine joy in their connection. He had missed all of this. Every milestone, every bedtime story, every scraped knee that needed kissing better. "Alexander," Mia said, offering him a handful of marshmallows. Do you like stories? I know lots of good ones. I love stories, Alexander said truthfully. Would you tell me your favorite? As they settled around the small kitchen table with steaming mugs of hot chocolate, Mia launched into an elaborate tale about a princess who could talk to dinosaurs. Alexander found himself genuinely enchanted, not just by the story, but by the animated way she told it, using different voices for different characters, and gesturing wildly to emphasize important plot points. And then, Mia concluded dramatically, the Trex became the princess's best friend, and they lived happily ever after in a castle made of purple crystals. That's a wonderful story, Alexander said, and he meant it. You're an excellent storyteller. Mommy says I get that from her side of the family, Mia said proudly. But I think I might get other things from other places too. Grace and Alexander exchanged glances over Mia's head. Even at 5 years old, she was intuitive enough to sense the undercurrents in the conversation. Mia, sweetie, Grace said gently, it's getting very late. Why don't you go brush your teeth and get ready for bed? But I don't want Alexander to leave yet, Mia protested. We just started being friends. I have to go soon, Alexander said, his heart breaking at the disappointed expression on her face. But maybe I could see you again sometime? If your mommy says it's okay? Mia turned to Grace with hopeful eyes. Please, Mommy? Can Alexander come back and visit us? He could tell me stories too. And maybe we could show him my dinosaur collection. Grace looked trapped between her protective instincts and her daughter's obvious happiness. We'll see, baby. These are complicated things that grown-ups need to figure out. I don't think it's complicated, Mia said with the simple logic of childhood. I like Alexander, and he likes me, and you like him too, even though you're trying to pretend you don't. So, he should just stay and be part of our family. As Mia reluctantly went to get ready for bed, Grace and Alexander found themselves alone again. The kitchen felt smaller now, charged with years of unresolved emotions and the weight of decisions that would affect all their futures. And, she's right, you know, Alexander said quietly. I do like you. I always like you. What happened between us 6 years ago, it wasn't about not caring. It was about being scared and stupid and completely unprepared for anything real. Grace wrapped her hands around her mug, using the warmth to steady herself. You hurt me, Alexander. You hurt me in a way that I'm still not completely over. And now you want to come back into our lives, when everything is uncertain and scary. And I don't know if I can trust you not to hurt her the way you hurt me. I understand, Alexander said. I understand why you're scared, and you have every right to protect her from me. But Grace, I'm not the same person I was 6 years ago. These months of driving the taxi, of talking to real people with real problems, it's changed me. I've been searching for something meaningful, and I never realized that what I was looking for was already out there, waiting for me. Pretty words, Grace said, but her voice lacked conviction. But words are easy. It's actions that matter, especially with children. Then let me show you, Alexander said urgently. Let me prove that I'm serious about this. I know I can't undo the past, but maybe I can help shape the future. Hers, yours, ours. From down the hall, they could hear Mia calling out, Mommy, can you come tuck me in? And can Alexander come too? I want to show him my favorite stuffed animal. Grace closed her eyes, clearly struggling with the decision. If you do this, if you start being part of her life, you can't change your mind later. You can't decide it's too hard or too complicated. She's already attached to you, and I won't let you break her heart. I won't, Alexander said with quiet conviction. Grace, I swear to you, I won't abandon her again. Either of you. They walked down the hallway together, past walls decorated with Mia's artwork and school photos. Alexander's chest tightened as he realized how much life had happened in this house without him. Birthdays, holidays, first days of school, all the moments that made up a childhood. Mia's bedroom was a riot of purple and dinosaur decorations. Books were stacked everywhere, and stuffed animals lined the bed like a loyal army. She was already under the covers, but her eyes were bright with excitement at having both adults come to say goodnight. This is Mr. Roars, she said, holding up a worn purple dinosaur. "He's been my best friend since I was little." "He looks like a very good friend," Alexander said seriously. "The kind who keeps you safe at night and listens to all your secrets." "Exactly," Mia exclaimed. "Mommy says that the best friends are the ones who stay with you, even when things are scary." Alexander felt the weight of those words. He had not been the kind of person who stayed when things got scary. He had been the kind who ran, who chose professional safety over personal connection. But looking at this little girl, his daughter, he felt something fundamental shift inside him. "Mia," he said carefully, "can I ask you something important?" She nodded solemnly. "Yes. If I promise to try very hard to be a good friend to you and your mommy, would you like that? Even if it takes me some time to learn how to do it right?" Mia considered this question with the gravity it deserved. "Would you pinky promise?" "Because pinky promises are the most serious kind." Alexander extended his pinky finger, and Mia wrapped her much smaller one around it. "I pinky promise to try my very best to be someone you can count on." "And I pinky promise to help you learn," Mia said, "because sometimes grown-ups need help figuring things out, and kids are really good at helping." As Grace tucked Mia into bed and turned off the light, Alexander found himself overwhelmed by the simplicity and profundity of what had just happened. A pinky promise from a 5-year-old had just become the most important contract of his life. Back in the living room, Grace and Alexander sat on opposite ends of the couch, the space between them filled with years of hurt and the tentative possibility of healing. "I need to know that you're serious about this," Grace said. "I need to know that this isn't just some midlife crisis or guilt-driven impulse that you'll regret when real life sets in." Alexander looked around the room, taking in the photos of Mia at different ages, the evidence of a life lived with love and care despite financial struggles. "What's your address here?" he asked suddenly. Grace looked confused. 1847 Maple Street. "Why?" "I've been driving this city for months, picking up people from every neighborhood, every walk of life. Do you know how many times I've driven past this street?" "I have no idea." "Dozens," Alexander said. "Maybe hundreds. I never paid attention to it, because it wasn't part of my world. But tonight, when I got the call to pick you up at the hospital, this is where you directed me. To a street I've passed by countless times without seeing." Grace remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I don't think that's a coincidence," Alexander said. "I think I've been searching for something I didn't even know I'd lost. I've been driving around this city looking for meaning, for connection, for something real. And it turns out that what I was looking for was here all along, on a street I passed but never really saw." "Life isn't a fairy tale, Alexander," Grace said softly. "Being a father isn't about grand gestures or poetic realizations. It's about showing up every day, even when it's boring or difficult or inconvenient." "I know," Alexander said, "and I know I have to earn the right to be part of her life. I have to prove that I've changed, that I can be reliable and present, and everything I wasn't before." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Grace spoke. "The test results should come back on Tuesday. If you're serious about this, about being part of her life, then I guess we'll find out what kind of father you are under pressure." "Whatever the results show," Alexander said, "I'll be here. However scared I am, however out of my depth I feel, I'll be here." "We'll see," Grace said, but there was less skepticism in her voice than before. "For now, you should probably go. It's been a long night for all of us." Alexander stood, reluctant to leave this warm house, and returned to his empty penthouse. Would it be okay if I called tomorrow? Just to check how she's feeling?" Grace nodded slowly. "That would be okay. But Alexander, if you start this, if you become part of her life, there's no going back. She's already half in love with the idea of having a father. If you disappoint her—" "I won't," Alexander said firmly. "I can't promise I'll do everything right, but I can promise I won't disappear again." As Alexander walked back to his taxi, he felt as though he was moving through a dream. The events of the evening had turned his entire world upside down. A few hours ago, he had been a lonely CEO playing at being a taxi driver to feel connected to humanity. Now he was a father, with all the terrifying and wonderful responsibilities that entailed. The drive back to his penthouse gave him time to process what had happened. Mia had asked if he was her new daddy, and in that moment, something had awakened in him that he had never known existed. Not just paternal instinct, but a fierce protective love that made all his business concerns seem trivial by comparison. His penthouse felt even more cold and sterile than usual when he arrived home. The expensive artwork and designer furniture seemed meaningless now that he had experienced the warmth of a real home. He found himself looking at his space through new eyes, wondering what Mia would think of it, whether it could ever feel welcoming to a child who had grown up surrounded by love rather than luxury. Alexander didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat by his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights and thinking about the choices he had made that had led him to this moment. For years, he had told himself that his work was his legacy, that building a business empire was how he would leave his mark on the world. But what legacy could compare to raising a child, to being present for the thousands of small moments that shaped a life? By morning, he had made several decisions. The first was that he would step back from the day-to-day operations of Clark Industries, delegating more responsibility to his capable executive team. The second was that he would sell the penthouse and find a home in a real neighborhood, somewhere a child could ride bikes and play in yards. The third was that he would continue driving the taxi, not as an escape from his real life, but as a way to stay connected to the kind of people who had taught him what really mattered. The next day, Alexander found himself in unfamiliar territory, standing in the toy section of a department store, completely overwhelmed by the choices. What did 5-year-old girls like? What would be appropriate from someone who was essentially a stranger, despite being her biological father? He finally settled on a collection of books about dinosaurs, remembering her enthusiasm for paleontology, and a small purple stuffed triceratops that reminded him of Mr. Roars. When he called Grace that afternoon, his hands were surprisingly steady, despite the importance of the conversation. "How is she feeling today?" he asked without preamble. "Tired, but better," Grace replied. "She's been asking about you all morning. She wants to know if you're really her daddy, or if she just dreamed it." Alexander's chest tightened. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that sometimes families are complicated, but that you care about her very much." Grace paused. "Alexander, we need to have a serious conversation about how we handle this. If we're going to tell her the truth, we need to do it together, and we need to do it right." "I agree," Alexander said. "Whatever you think is best. I'll follow your lead. Can you come over tonight? After dinner? She'll be more relaxed then, and we can talk about it properly." That evening, Alexander found himself once again walking up the path to the blue house with the white fence. But this time he carried the weight of impending truth. Mia greeted him at the door with the enthusiasm of a puppy, throwing her arms around his legs in a hug that nearly knocked him over. "Alexander, you came back. Mommy said you might not, but I knew you would because you pinky promised." "I always keep my pinky promises," Alexander said, kneeling down to her level and presenting the gifts he had brought. "I brought you something." Mia's eyes widened as she unwrapped the books and the purple dinosaur. "These are perfect. Look, Mommy, he got me a triceratops." "That's my second favorite dinosaur, after the Brachiosaurus." "What do you say, Mia?" Grace prompted gently. "Thank you, Alexander. These are the best presents ever." Mia hugged the stuffed dinosaur tightly. "What should we name him?" "I think you should choose," Alexander said. "You're better at names than I am." "I'll call him Little Alex," Mia announced. "After you." Alexander felt his throat constrict with emotion. The simple gesture of naming her new toy after him felt more meaningful than any business award he had ever received. After Mia had thoroughly examined her new books, Grace suggested they all sit down for the conversation they needed to have. Alexander's palms were sweating as they gathered in the living room, Mia cross-legged on the floor with her dinosaur collection spread around her like a prehistoric army. "Mia, sweetie," Grace began carefully, "Alexander and I need to tell you something important about him, about us, about our family." "Is it good news or sad news?" Mia asked, her intuitive nature picking up on the gravity of the moment. "It's both," Grace said honestly. Alexander is your daddy, baby. Your real daddy. Mia looked from Grace to Alexander and back again, processing this information with the seriousness it deserved. I knew it, she said finally. I knew it in my heart yesterday. That's why I felt so happy when I saw him. The sad part, Grace continued, is that Alexander didn't know about you when you were born. And that's why he hasn't been here before now. But he's here now, Mia said matter-of-factly. And he brought me dinosaur books. So the sad part is over, right? End quote. Alexander felt tears prick his eyes at her simple acceptance. Mia, I want you to know that even though I wasn't here before, I'm never going to leave you again. Do you understand that? Are you going to live with us now? Mia asked hopefully. Alexander looked at Grace, who shook her head slightly. Not right away, sweetheart. Your daddy and I need some time to figure out how to make this work. But he's going to visit us a lot, and you'll get to spend time with him. Can he come to my soccer game on Saturday? Mia asked. I'm the fastest runner on my team. I would love to come to your soccer game, Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. I want to come to all your soccer games, if that's okay with you. As they continued to talk, Alexander found himself marveling at Mia's resilience and adaptability. She accepted the situation with a grace that put the adults to shame, asking practical questions about when she would see him and whether he could help her with her homework sometimes. I'm really good at math, she told him proudly. But I'm not so good at spelling. Are you good at spelling? I'm decent at spelling, Alexander said. But I think he might be better at math than I am. That's okay, Mia said generously. We can help each other. That night, after Alexander had read 3 dinosaur books aloud and helped tuck Mia into bed, he and Grace sat on the front porch, both emotionally drained from the intensity of the evening. She's incredible, Alexander said. The way she just accepted everything. The way she's willing to trust me despite not knowing me. I don't deserve that kind of faith. Children are naturally forgiving, Grace said. But Alexander, you have to understand that this innocence makes her vulnerable too. She's going to love you completely, and immediately. Which means you have the power to devastate her if you're not careful. I know, Alexander said, and I know that trust has to be earned. I'm prepared to work for it, for as long as it takes. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. Finally, Grace spoke. I called the hospital today. The test results might be ready as early as tomorrow afternoon. Alexander felt his stomach drop. In all the emotional upheaval of the past 24 hours, he had almost forgotten about the medical tests. Whatever the results are, we'll handle it together. Will we? Grace asked quietly. Because if she's sick, really sick, it's going to be incredibly difficult. There will be treatments and hospital stays and moments when you'll wonder if you can handle watching your child suffer. Grace, I'm not going anywhere, Alexander said firmly. Healthy or sick, easy times or hard times, I'm not going anywhere. The next day was Saturday, and true to his word, Alexander showed up for Mia's soccer game. He felt ridiculously nervous standing on the sidelines with the other parents, all of whom seemed to know exactly what they were doing. He had never attended a children's sporting event in his life, had no idea of the proper etiquette or expectations, but watching Mia run across the field, her ponytail flying behind her, and her face lit up with joy, Alexander felt a pride so fierce it nearly brought him to his knees. Every time she kicked the ball, every time she called out to her teammates, every time she looked over at the sidelines to make sure he was watching, his heart swelled with love he hadn't known he was capable of feeling. She's fast, commented another parent, a woman with kind eyes and a coffee-stained team shirt. Is this your first time watching her play? Yes, Alexander said, realizing how much weight that simple word carried. It's my first time watching her do anything. The woman looked at him curiously, but didn't press for details. Alexander was grateful for her discretion. He wasn't ready to explain his complicated situation to strangers. After the game, which Mia's team won by 2 goals, she ran over to him with grass stains on her uniform and triumph written across her face. Did you see me score? Did you see that goal in the second half? I saw everything, Alexander said, lifting her up and spinning her around. "You were amazing. I'm so proud of you." As they walked back to Grace's car, Mia chattering excitedly about the game, Alexander's phone rang. He almost ignored it, but the caller ID showed Grace's number. "It's your mom," he told Mia, handing her the phone. Alexander could only hear one side of the conversation, but he watched Mia's expression change from excitement to confusion to something that looked like fear. "Okay, Mommy." Mia said quietly. "We'll come home right now." "What is it?" Alexander asked as Mia handed him back the phone. "The doctor called," Mia said, her voice small. "Mommy needs to talk to us." The drive back to Maple Street felt like the longest journey of Alexander's life. Mia was unusually quiet in the back seat, and he could see her small hands clenched together in his rearview mirror. When they arrived at the house, Grace was waiting on the porch, her face pale but composed. "Is it bad news?" Mia asked immediately, running to her mother's arms. Grace knelt down and gathered her daughter close. "The doctor wants to see us on Monday to talk about the test results. He didn't want to discuss it over the phone." Alexander felt cold fear wash over him. Doctors who wanted to discuss results in person rarely had good news to share. "But I feel fine," Mia protested. "I played soccer today, and I scored a goal." "Sick kids can't score goals, right?" "Feeling fine is good, baby," Grace said, her voice carefully controlled. "Whatever the doctor has to tell us, we'll handle it together. All three of us." That night, after Mia had gone to bed, Alexander and Grace sat at the kitchen table, both too anxious to eat the dinner Grace had prepared. "I keep thinking about all the time I've already lost," Alexander said quietly. "And now, if she's really sick, if we don't have as much time as we should." "Don't," Grace said sharply. "Don't go down that road. We don't know anything yet, and borrowing trouble won't help anyone." "How do you do it?" Alexander asked. "How do you stay so strong when you must be terrified?" Grace was quiet for a long moment. "I learned a long time ago that falling apart is a luxury I can't afford. She needs me to be steady, to be her rock, and now, if you're really going to be part of this, she needs that from you too." Alexander reached across the table and took Grace's hand, surprised when she didn't pull away. "Then that's what I'll be. Whatever happens on Monday, whatever we're facing, I'll be her rock. I'll be your rock too, if you'll let me." For the first time since he had walked back into their lives, Grace looked at him with something approaching trust. "I'm scared, Alexander. I'm so scared that I can barely breathe." "I'm scared too," Alexander admitted. "But we don't have to be scared alone anymore." Monday morning dawned gray and cold, matching the mood in the little blue house. Mia seemed to sense the adult's anxiety and was unusually clingy, wanting to sit between Grace and Alexander in the waiting room at the hospital. Dr. Patricia Chen was a warm woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that immediately put Mia at ease. She knelt down to Mia's level when they entered her office. "How are you feeling today, Mia?" she asked. "I'm okay," Mia said, though she pressed closer to Grace's side. "My tummy feels funny, but Mommy says that's just because I'm nervous." "That's very normal," Dr. Chen assured her. "Sometimes our bodies feel funny when we're waiting for news." As Dr. Chen settled behind her desk, Alexander found himself holding his breath. This woman held the power to change their lives forever with whatever she was about to say. "I have good news," Dr. Chen began, and Alexander felt his entire body sag with relief. "The blood tests came back normal. Mia doesn't have leukemia." Grace started crying immediately, tears of relief streaming down her face. Alexander felt his own eyes well up as he reached over to squeeze Mia's hand. "So I'm not sick?" Mia asked, looking confused by the adult's emotional reactions. "You're not sick with anything serious," Dr. Chen confirmed. "The dizziness and fatigue you've been experiencing are likely due to a combination of stress and not eating properly. Sometimes when we're worried or upset, our bodies react in ways that can make us feel unwell." "Have I been runny?" "Worried? Worried?" Mia asked, looking at Grace and Alexander. "Sometimes children worry about things without even realizing it," Dr. Chen explained gently. "Have there been any big changes in your life lately? Anything different or new?" Mia considered this seriously. "Well, "I found my daddy," she said matter-of-factly. "That's pretty big and new." Dr. Chen looked at Grace and Alexander with understanding. Family changes can be stressful, even when they're good changes. Your body might have been reacting to all the new emotions you've been feeling. As they left the hospital, Alexander felt as though a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying had been lifted from his shoulders. Mia skipped between him and Grace, holding both their hands and chattering about how they should celebrate her not being sick. "Can we get ice cream?" she asked. "And can we go to the park? And can Alexander push me on the swings really high?" "We can do all of those things," Grace said, laughing through her tears. "We can do whatever you want today." At the park, Alexander discovered the simple joy of pushing his daughter on a swing set. Her delighted squeals of, "Higher, Daddy, higher," filled a space in his heart he hadn't known was empty. Other parents nodded at him in the universal acknowledgement of shared exhaustion and joy that came with entertaining energetic children. "Watch this," Mia called out, launching herself from the swing at the peak of its arc and landing in a pile of autumn leaves. "Mia, be careful," Grace called out, but she was laughing. "Did you see that, Daddy?" Mia asked, scrambling to her feet and brushing leaves from her hair. "I flew like a bird." "I saw," Alexander said, his heart still racing from the momentary terror of watching her leap. "But maybe next time warn us before you decide to become airborne?" As the afternoon wore on, Alexander found himself settling into the rhythm of family life. There were scraped knees to kiss, arguments about how much ice cream constituted a reasonable serving, and negotiations about bedtime that required diplomatic skills he had never needed in corporate tries. Boardrooms. That evening, as they sat around Grace's kitchen table, sharing pizza and talking about their day, Alexander realized that this was what he had been searching for during all those nights driving the taxi. Not the grand gesture or the dramatic revelation, but the simple sense of belonging, of being needed and wanted, not for what he could provide, but for who he was. "Daddy," Mia said, the words still sounding wonderfully foreign and familiar at the same time, "will you read me a story tonight?" "I would love to," Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. "What story would you like to hear?" "The one about the princess and the dinosaurs," Mia said. "But I want you to tell it, not read it from a book. I want you to make up your own version." Later that night, after Alexander had invented an elaborate tale about a princess who discovered that dinosaurs were excellent at solving problems and even better at giving hugs, he and Grace sat on the porch again. This was becoming their routine, these quiet conversations after Mia had gone to bed. "Thank you," Grace said quietly. "For what?" "For being here today, for being exactly what she needed, for not running away when things got scary." Alexander was quiet for a moment, thinking about how much his life had changed in just a few days. "Grace, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay. Okay. Do you think there's a chance for us? Not just as Mia's parents, but as more than that? More than that?" Grace sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I don't know, Alexander. There's so much history between us, so much hurt. And we're different people now than we were 6 years ago." "Different how?" "I'm a mother now. That changes everything about how I see the world, how I make decisions. Every choice I make has to be filtered through what's best for Mia. And you're learning how to be a father. But you're also still the CEO of a multinational corporation. I don't know how those two things fit together." End quote. Alexander had been thinking about this very issue. What if I told you I was considering stepping down from the CEO position? Not immediately, but over the next year or two. Grace looked at him in surprise. "You would do that?" "I've been thinking about it for months, even before I knew about Mia. The company doesn't need me to micromanage every decision anymore. I have excellent people in place who could run things just as well, maybe better. And I've learned that there are more important things than quarterly profits." End quote. "Like what?" "Like not missing another one of my daughter's soccer games. Like being present for the thousands of small moments that make up a childhood. Like maybe finding a way to build something real with you, if you're willing to let me try." Grace was quiet for a long time, and Alexander could see her internal struggle playing out across her features. Finally, she spoke. "I'm willing to try. Slowly. Carefully. With Mia's well-being as our top priority. But I'm willing to try." Alexander felt his heart soar. "Really? Really? But Alexander, I need you to understand something. This isn't going to be easy. Learning to be a family, figuring out how to blend your world with ours, dealing with all the practical complications of your wealth and status, it's going to be complicated." "I know," Alexander said. "But I think the best things in life usually are complicated." Over the following weeks, Alexander threw himself into learning how to be a father with the same intensity he had once applied to business deals. He attended parent-teacher conferences, helped with homework, and learned the intricate social dynamics of 5-year-old friendships. He discovered that bedtime stories were an art form, that scraped knees required specific protocols for proper healing, and that the phrase, "because I said so," was sometimes the only argument that mattered. The transition wasn't without its challenges. Alexander's first attempt at making breakfast resulted in smoke alarms and burnt pancakes. His idea of an appropriate toy budget had to be severely adjusted when Grace pointed out that buying Mia everything she expressed interest in would spoil her, rather than show love. And his natural instinct to solve problems with money had to be tempered with the understanding that some things required time and patience rather than financial resources. But there were magical moments too. The first time Mia fell asleep against his shoulder during a movie, the pride he felt when she scored another goal at soccer and looked directly at him before celebrating. The warmth that spread through his chest when she absently took his hand while they walked through the grocery store. 1 month after that first taxi ride, Alexander made a decision that surprised even him. He put his penthouse on the market and began looking for a house in Mia's neighborhood. Not because Grace had asked him to, but because he couldn't imagine living anywhere that required more than a 5-minute drive to reach his daughter. "You don't have to do this," Grace said when he told her about the house hunting. "We're not asking you to change your entire life." "You're not asking," Alexander said. "I'm choosing. This is where I want to be." The house he eventually bought was 3 blocks from Grace's, a modest 2-story home with a yard big enough for swing sets and sandbox adventures. When Mia saw it for the first time, she immediately began planning where her toys would go during visits and which room would be best for reading stories. "It's perfect, Daddy," she announced, with the authority of someone who had given the matter serious consideration. "It's just the right size for a family." As Alexander stood in his new backyard, watching Mia chase butterflies among the overgrown flower beds he planned to restore, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. 6 months ago, he had been driving a taxi in search of meaning, never suspecting that meaning would find him in the form of a 5-year-old girl who saw right through his disguise to the father he was meant to become. The relationship with Grace developed slowly, built on the foundation of shared parenting and mutual respect. They went on family outings that gradually began to feel like dates. They had long conversations after Mia's bedtime that ranged from practical parenting decisions to deeper discussions about dreams and fears and the kind of future they wanted to build together. 3 months after Alexander had bought his house, Grace found him in his backyard on a Saturday morning, assembling a swing set with the focused determination of someone tackling a complex business merger. "Need help?" she asked, settling onto the porch steps with a cup of coffee. "I think I've got it figured out," Alexander said, though the instruction manual suggested otherwise. "Mia is coming over this afternoon, and I promised her we'd have the swings ready. You know she'd be perfectly happy helping you build it, right? She loves projects." "I know," Alexander said, pausing in his work. "But I want to surprise her. I want her to see that I keep my promises." Grace watched him struggle with a particularly stubborn bolt for a few minutes before speaking again. "Alexander, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Of course. Are you happy? Really happy? Because sometimes I worry that you're trying so hard to be the perfect father that you're not letting yourself just enjoy being one." "One." Alexander set down his tools and looked at her thoughtfully. "I am happy. Happier than I've ever been in my life. But you're right. I am trying to be perfect. I guess I'm still scared that if I make too many mistakes, you'll decide I'm not worth the risk." "You don't have to be perfect," Grace said gently. You just have to be present. You just have to keep showing up. I can do that, Alexander said. I want to do that. Good, Grace said, standing up and walking over to him. Because there's something I need to tell you. Alexander felt his heart skip a beat at the serious tone in her voice. What is it? I love you, Grace said simply. I love the man you've become. The father you are to Mia. The way you fought to earn a place in our lives. I love you, and I think it's time I told you that. Alexander dropped the tools completely, reaching for her with hands that shook slightly. I love you too. I've loved you for weeks, but I was afraid to say it, afraid you'd think it was too soon or too complicated. Everything about us is complicated, Grace said, laughing. But that doesn't make it any less real. When Mia arrived that afternoon and found them kissing in the backyard next to her half-assembled swing set, she reacted with the pragmatic acceptance that had become her trademark. Are you going to get married now? She asked matter-of-factly. Because if you are, I think we should have purple flowers at the wedding. And dinosaur cake toppers. Alexander and Grace looked at each other and burst out laughing. Trust their daughter to cut straight to the heart of the matter. We haven't talked about marriage yet, sweetheart, Grace said. Well, you should, Mia said, with the confidence of someone who had given the matter considerable thought. Because I want to have the same last name as both my parents, and I want to live in the same house, and I want us to be a real family. We already are a real family, Alexander said, kneeling down to her level. Marriage doesn't make a family real. Love makes a family real. But marriage would make it official, Mia insisted. Like when you sign papers for important business stuff. Alexander looked at Grace, seeing his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. You know what? You're absolutely right. Marriage would make it official. And so it was that Alexander Clark, CEO of a billion-dollar empire, found himself taking romantic advice from a 5-year-old who had already planned their entire wedding down to the dinosaur cake toppers. 6 months later, on a beautiful spring day in the backyard of the house Alexander had bought to be close to his family, they were married in a ceremony that was small but perfect. Mia served as both flower girl and ring bearer, wearing a purple dress with dinosaur accessories that she had picked out herself. The cake did indeed feature dinosaur toppers, along with a small figure of a taxicab to commemorate the night that had brought them all together. In his wedding speech, Alexander talked about how he had spent years driving through the city, looking for something he couldn't name, never realizing that what he sought was a little girl with green eyes who would call him Daddy and change his understanding of what it meant to have a meaningful life. Some people say that everything happens for a reason, he said, looking at his new wife and daughter. I don't know if that's true, but I do know that sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get a second chance to become the person you were always meant to be. Grace and Mia gave me that chance, and I intend to spend the rest of my life proving that I was worthy of it. As they danced their first dance as a married family, with Mia standing on Alexander's feet and Grace in his arms, Alexander marveled at the perfect circularity of it all. He had disguised himself as a taxi driver to find authenticity, never knowing that authenticity would find him in the backseat of his own cab, in the form of a question from a little girl who saw straight through to the father he was meant to become. The taxi sat in their garage now, not abandoned, but transformed into something else entirely. Sometimes, on quiet Saturday mornings, the three of them would pile into it for adventures around the city. Mia loved sitting in the front seat, pretending to be the driver, while Alexander pointed out landmarks, and Grace told stories about the places they passed. This is where Daddy picked us up that first night, Grace would say as they drove past Mercy General. And this is where he realized he loved us, Mia would add as they passed the street where Alexander had first felt his heart recognize his family. Alexander Clark had spent years building an empire, but his greatest achievement turned out to be much simpler and infinitely more complex than any business success. He had learned to be a father, a husband, a man who measured his worth not in dollars, but in bedtime stories read, soccer games attended, and quiet moments stolen on front porches after little girls had fallen asleep. The disguise he had worn as a taxi driver had been meant to hide his identity, but instead, it had revealed his true self. Sometimes, the most important journeys began not with a destination in mind, but with the simple willingness to pick up strangers and see where the road would lead. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, That road led home to a little blue house with a white fence, where a 5-year-old girl with wise green eyes was waiting to call you daddy and teach you that the best adventures were the ones that happened when you stopped running and started staying.